Hey, Cross Park family. Grant here. Obviously not Jeff. I'm sitting in my backyard bringing you the leadership update this week because Jeff and family are out of town. The five of them getting a week away before they get jumped back into the fall, which, as you probably are aware, we're in August already, which I don't know how that happened, but here we are, and such is life. It is August of 2023, believe it or not. For Sunday morning, just a couple of announcements for you, a couple of things to remind you of, let you know what's going on a little bit. I guess maybe the first, I should mention why I'm sitting out here. There's a hummingbird feeder over my shoulder. The hummingbirds have been super active in our backyard the last couple of days, and I thought maybe it'd be fun to give you a chance to maybe see some of our hummingbirds. So at least that'll give you something interesting to look for during an update video. So this week on Sunday morning, we'll be carrying on our series in the Psalms of Ascent, Psalms 120 to 134. We'll be looking particularly at Psalm 132. 132 is the longest of the Psalms of Ascent. It is a Davidic psalm. It is a royal psalm. That is, it celebrates the kingship of David. It seems to be particularly about when not David built the temple, but his son built the temple. And God's people were filling the temple up with the various worship furniture, and they were bringing particularly the Ark of the Covenant into the temple. And so it's this prayer, in part it's a prayer of God's people asking that God would bless their worship, that he would allow them to show up and be there and worship the Lord together. But then the second half of the psalm isn't so much our prayer as the Lord's response. It's the Lord's. Every now and again, the hummingbirds get very close and make me a little nervous. Psalm 132, the second half, is the Lord's response to David's promise, I'm going to build a house for the Lord, but also the prayers of God's people. And that second half of Psalm 132 really helps us zero in on seeing that how the Lord is going to provide is through Jesus. So the fulfillment of Psalm 132, the fulfillment of all these Old Testament Davidic promises, is not in Solomon, it's not in Rehoboam or some other descendant of David other than Jesus. It is David's greatest son, the King Jesus. And so that is going to be the focus of Psalm 132 for us. As we sit on this side of the cross and this side of the resurrection, we can see Psalm 132 in its broader context and its redemptive, in the redemptive context in which it fits. So that being the case, we see that Psalm 132 helps us acknowledge that our truest longings are fulfilled by the Lord. And he fulfills those longings, he makes provision for them, sometimes even before we feel them. Obviously, I mean, if he gave us Jesus before any of us have lived or done anything right or wrong, he provided for us before we were even aware of our need, before we even were. What a beautiful God we serve. What a gracious King who would meet our needs before we even knew that we had them. So 132 helps us evaluate in some ways, and Lord willing, helps us align our aspirations, our longings, our desires with God's purposes, with God's redemption, and all of that focused in Jesus. So Psalm 132 this weekend, it's the longest of the Songs of Ascent, 18 verses. So it'll be helpful if you give it a read ahead of time. I will note that in the service, in particular in the service guide, we're going to present the text in a little bit of a different way because there's some connections that I want us to see. And so just be aware that when you scroll through on your phone or when you get a printed worship guide, the text is going to be presented a little different. It's still the ESV, Psalm 132. I just wanted it organized a little bit so that we could see some of the connections, particularly between verses 1 through 5, 6 through 10, 11 and 12, and then 13 to 18. So that'll all make sense on Sunday morning, but would encourage you to read through Psalm 132 ahead of time and know that we'll have a little bit of, it'll be presented a little bit differently in the worship guide, but not to worry, it'll all make sense. A couple of other things to mention for you. Our new youth director is getting into town this weekend. Saturday's the plan. Andrew and Morgan and their little daughter Lizzie Clay are moving to Charlotte this weekend, and we're very excited about that. So look forward to him beginning his ministry over the coming weeks and months. And to our youth and among us, I trust that we will welcome Andrew and Morgan and Lizzie Clay warmly. I remember a year ago being welcomed warmly by this congregation. And as I approach my 1-year mark, it still is amazing to me that it's only been that long. We feel so much more connected than 10 or 11 months would normally lead someone to feel connected to a church body. So that's in large part because of you, your graciousness, your generosity, your love. So trust that that same experience will be Andrew and Morgan's, and excited for them to be here. They get in on Saturday, and Lord willing, will be with us Sunday morning in worship. As I mentioned earlier, we're in August, so there's only 4 Sundays left of our summer schedule. So you'll want to note that we go to our fall schedule the first Sunday in September. Okay, so that's September 3rd. We'll begin our fall schedule. And the main changes there are that Sunday school, we start back. Sunday school starts at 9:30, and then worship at 10:30. So this is still 4 weeks out, 5 weeks out technically. But for the next 4 Sundays, we'll still be on our summer schedule, show up at 9:30. But then when we start our fall schedule, show up at 9:30 still, but just come prepared for Sunday school. So we'll have Sunday school for children, youth, and adults beginning September 3rd, and that'll run for 3 months, September, October, November. And then the plan will be to go to our winter schedule so that we can try and combat some of the chilliness that happens during the winter. Just a couple of other notes. With the Fall Sunday School series, I mention this now, it's still 5 weeks out, but I mention it now because you may want to buy some materials, you may want to do some reading ahead of time. Our plan for Fall Sunday School for the adults this fall is to go through our denomination's 3 most recent study committee reports. And that sounds boring, it sounds really dull, but the 3 most recent study committee reports that our denomination has worked on and received are on the topics of racial reconciliation, human sexuality, and domestic abuse. These are 3 weighty topics. They're relevant in our culture, and they're relevant for us as a Christian church in our culture. As believers, how do we navigate these waters that we're living in and swimming in? So, race, sexuality, and abuse. We're going to spend a number of weeks on each of those topics. And why I mention that now is our denomination has published each of those study committee reports and some of the associated documents in a series of books that you can access, that you can buy. I have a number of copies now. We'll make those available. But if you want to go ahead and purchase one for yourself, each of those study committee reports is in a separate book. And you can get those at the PC. If you Google PCA Bookstore, you'll be able to link to that. So Google PCA Bookstore, and you'll have access to those study committee reports if you want to read ahead in prep for our Fall Sunday School series. Would also just note for you briefly that as fall approaches, there are going to be a number of kickoff events. So various ministries are going to have their own kickoff events, men's ministry, women's ministry, all our Thrive groups, all that sort of stuff, youth, all that is going to get kicked off. So just stay tuned in the coming weeks for announcements about when and where those kickoff events are going to be. But we are planning those and looking forward to ramping up into our fall series, into our fall schedule. As well, and there'll be more about this in the future, but we always have need for volunteers. So there's a lot that has to happen to make a Sunday morning happen, to make Wednesday evenings happen for our youth. So volunteering for roadies, set up and tear down, volunteers for our nursery, volunteers for our welcome team, volunteers for helping with the youth group, all these sorts of things. Musicians, I mean, there's a lot that goes on. So if you're new to Cross Park especially, and are interested in any of those things, you can respond to this email on our website. There are a lot of resources on the website, ways that you can just click on various things and have all the access that you need and get connected with various people. So lots going on. Fall's not far away, but we're looking forward to continuing to do life together as a church family. And particularly on Sunday morning, we'll gather for worship at 9:30 at Hemby and study Psalm 132 together. Cross Park, we love you. We're looking forward to being with you in worship. Until we see each other again, grace and peace.